I need to check the list of used names first, then write the story. The band names include Maya, Marcus, Linda, Bev, Claire, Derek, Theo, Nathan, Renee, Iris, Nadia, Colin, Eli, Dara, Lauren, Ryan, Heather, Simone, Paige, Jenna, Connor, Patricia, Gerald, Francis, Stella, Oliver, Kelsey, April, Ben, Vanessa, Milo, Brooke, Wade, Garrett, Serena, Harrison, Donovan, Cassandra, Audrey, Wesley, Constance, Tara, Diane, Cynthia, Kevin, Elaine, Ren, Patrick, Hazel, Gwen, Detective Pruitt, Reeve, Tatum, Doris, Priya, Zoe, Caleb, Dax, Lorraine, Todd, Fern, Claudette, Nell, Ray, Sasha, Petra, Bridget, Ivy, Adele, Nora, Grant, Sloan, Vivienne, Felix, Mercer, Cecily, Petra, Bridget, Ivy, Adele, Nora, Grant, Sloan, Vivienne, Felix, Versus, June, Scott, Tammy, Owen, Abby, Renata, Donna, Willa, Kyle, Lacey, Curtis, Rochelle, Lena, Margot, Callum, Sterling, Autumn, Emmett, Harold, Suzanne, Vera, Ruth, Philip, Tamsin, Wardonna, Suzanne, Vera, Ruth, Philip, Tamsin. I'll use fresh names. Nora is banned, so I'll use Elise, narrator, sister Britt, mom, dad, sister's fiancé Conrad, lawyer Mr. Ashby, daughter Sophie. The morning I found out, I was standing in the kitchen making oatmeal for my daughter. Sophie was 6 years old and sitting at the table behind me, kicking her feet against the chair legs the way she always did when she was waiting for something. She had her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. She'd been sleeping with that rabbit since she was 2. His name was Buttons, and one of his eyes had fallen off last spring, and she refused to let me replace it because she said a one-eyed rabbit was more interesting. I remember all of that because normal things stick in your mind right before your world falls apart. Your brain takes a photograph of the ordinary moment that existed just before everything changed. I checked my banking app while the oats were heating. I did this every morning, not obsessively, just as a habit. I was careful with money. I had always been careful with money because money was the difference between Sophie getting the surgery she needed and Sophie not getting it. The balance on the screen said $214. I stood there and read that number 4 times. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and stirred the oatmeal because it was starting to stick to the bottom of the pot, and I didn't know what else to do with my hands. 201 ounce. 3 days ago, that account had $94,000 in it. I should back up. Sophie was born with a congenital spinal condition, a structural problem in the lower vertebrae that her pediatric orthopedist, Dr. Okafor, had been monitoring since she was 18 months old. For the first few years, it was manageable. She wore a brace at night. We did physical therapy twice a week. I learned more about pediatric spinal development than I ever wanted to know. But when Sophie turned 5, Dr. Okafor sat me down and said the window was closing. The correction needed to happen before her spine finished its growth pattern, and that meant surgery. Specific surgery. The kind that required a specialist at a children's hospital 4 hours away, the kind that wasn't fully covered by my insurance plan, the kind that had a price tag that made me feel like the floor had dropped out from under me the first time I heard it. The total out-of-pocket was going to land somewhere between $85,000 and $100,000, depending on the complexity. I was 29 years old, working as a medical billing coordinator, raising my daughter mostly alone after her father left when she was 3. I didn't have $85,000. I had a used Honda Civic and a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in a part of town where the good grocery store was a 20-minute drive. But I started saving. I picked up freelance work on weekends. I sold things I didn't need. I moved to a smaller apartment. I stopped buying new clothes. I ate lunch at my desk every day for 2 years. I told myself it was finite, that there was a number and I just had to reach it, and once I reached it, Sophie would be okay. It took me 2 years and 4 months to save $94,000. I put the money in a savings account. My mother was the only family I had in the same city, and she had always been good with financial paperwork. She'd helped me set up my first bank account when I was 18, walked me through my first tax return, co-signed my first apartment lease. When I opened the surgery fund account, she offered to be listed on it as a secondary account holder, just in case something happened to me. just in case I was ever incapacitated and someone needed to access it for Sophie. "You're a single mom," she said. "You need a backup. What if something happens to you and nobody can get to the money?" She said it with such practical, matter-of-fact love that I didn't hesitate. I added her name to the account. My sister's name is Britt. She is 3 years younger than me, and she has always been the one my parents looked at differently. I don't say that to be cruel. It is just true, and I spent a long time trying to find a less true way to say it before I gave up. My parents loved us both. I believe that. But Britt was the one who got the bigger bedroom growing up. Britt was the one they paid college tuition for while I took out loans. Britt was the one my mother called every Sunday morning, and when my mother called me, it was usually because she needed something, help with a form, a ride to an appointment, someone to watch the dog. I told myself it was birth order, or personality, or just the way families are. I told myself it didn't matter. Britt got engaged in March. His name is Conrad, and he works in real estate and has very white teeth and calls my mother Ma after knowing her for 14 months. She loves him. My father loves him. My mother started showing me wedding venue brochures before Britt had even officially announced the engagement to extended family. I was happy for my sister. I was genuinely happy for her. I sent her a bottle of champagne and a card. What I was not prepared for was what came next. The surgery was scheduled for the second Friday in August. I had confirmation from the hospital, pre-surgical consultations booked, Sophie's medical records transferred, accommodations arranged near the children's hospital. I had a binder. I was the kind of person who made a binder. On a Tuesday in late July, I checked my account and saw $214. I called the bank. The representative on the phone had a careful, neutral voice, the kind of voice people use when they are delivering information they know is going to cause a reaction, and they have been trained not to be part of the reaction. She told me that a withdrawal had been made 3 days prior. A full withdrawal, minus the minimum balance to keep the account open. The withdrawal had been authorized by the secondary account holder. She confirmed the amount. 93? 786 sounds. 786 downs. I asked her to repeat it. She did. I asked if there was any way this was an error. She said she was sorry, but the transaction had been processed correctly. The secondary account holder had full withdrawal rights. There were no flags on the account, no restrictions on access, no alerts required for large transactions. Everything had been done within the terms of the account agreement. I thanked her. I don't know why I thanked her. I just did. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, and Sophie was still kicking her feet against the chair, still waiting for her oatmeal, still holding buttons under her arm. She looked up at me and said, "Mama, it's bubbling." I took the pot off the heat. I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she wasn't avoiding me. Not yet. "Hey, honey." Normal voice. Warm voice. The voice she used when everything was fine. I asked her about the account. There was a pause. Not a long one. Maybe 3 seconds. But I have replayed those 3 seconds in my mind more times than I can count, because in those 3 seconds I heard her decide something. I heard her choose the version of this conversation she was going to have. It was for Britt's wedding, she said. Just like that. No preamble, no softening. It was for Britt's wedding. She explained it to me like I was a little slow. The venue they'd originally booked had a last-minute cancellation on a premium date, a date Britt had wanted from the beginning. A Saturday in late September at a vineyard that had a 2-year waiting list. The cancellation opened a spot, but the deposit to hold it was due within 48 hours, and the total for the venue alone was going to be north of $60,000. Conrad's family was contributing what they could. My father had put in some savings, and there was still a gap. We needed to move fast, my mother said. "You're answering your phone." I had not answered my phone because it had been a Tuesday afternoon and I had been in a meeting at work. "That money was for Sophie's surgery," I said. My voice sounded strange to me. Flat, like it belonged to someone else. "I know that," my mother said, "and we'll pay it back. The surgery is in 3 weeks. Then we'll figure something out." She said it like "figure something out" was a real plan, like those 4 words had weight and substance and could be exchanged at a hospital cashier's window for $93,000. "Mom, Sophie needs this surgery before September. Dr. Okafor said the window, I know what Dr. Okafor said." Her voice had shifted. There was an edge to it now. "But your sister's wedding is important too. You act like Britt doesn't matter. You've always done that." I sat down on the floor. Not on a chair, on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet, the linoleum cold through my jeans. I said, "She doesn't have to get married in September." My mother said, "She's been waiting for this date for 2 years." I said, "Sophie has been waiting for the surgery for 2 years." My mother said, "Don't be dramatic." And then, because I have spent my entire life being told not to be dramatic by a woman who has always had a talent for making the monster sound reasonable, I didn't say anything at all. My mother filled the silence. She said there would be time to reschedule. She said Dr. Okafor could push the date. She said people crowdfunded medical expenses all the time. She said this in a perfectly normal tone of voice, the way you'd talk about rescheduling a dental cleaning. And then she said, "I knew you'd overreact. That's why I didn't ask." I ended the call. I did not sleep that night. I went through Sophie's bedtime routine on autopilot: bath, pajamas, 2 chapters of her book, lights out, the little nightlight shaped like a crescent moon that she needed to fall asleep. I sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing slowed and evened out, and then I went to the living room and sat on the couch in the dark for a long time. I thought about calling my father. I thought about calling Britt. I thought about calling Britt. I thought about calling the bank back. Calling Dr. Okafor. Calling a lawyer. I thought about the binder on my desk with all the pre-surgical documentation in it, the hospital confirmation number printed at the top of the first page, the parking information for the children's hospital, the name of the social worker who had been assigned to Sophie's case and who had been so kind to us at the pre-surgical consultation. I thought about what it would feel like to tell Sophie the surgery wasn't happening. Sophie didn't fully understand what the surgery was. I had explained it to her in the way you explain complicated things to 6-year-olds. That the doctors were going to help fix something in her back so she wouldn't have to wear the brace anymore, so she could run and swim and do all the things she wanted to do without it hurting. She had accepted this with the practical equanimity of a child who has been going to medical appointments since before she could walk. She wasn't scared. She was ready. I was not going to tell her the surgery wasn't happening. I made a list. The first thing I did was call Dr. Okafor's office the next morning. I explained the situation. The surgeon scheduler was a woman named Ms. Patterson, and she had seen everything in 22 years of working in pediatric orthopedics, and she did not make me feel ashamed for calling. She told me the surgery date was still held, that the hospital had a financial assistance department, and that she would personally flag Sophie's file for emergency review. The financial assistance department was able to cover $34,000 of the gap based on Sophie's case. That left me $59,000 short. I called every family member I had contact information for. I called my father, who was devastated, genuinely, visibly devastated when I explained what had happened, who said he hadn't known the full amount, who said my mother had told him the surgery fund had more than enough buffer. He wired me $12,000. It was his retirement account. He sounded like a man who had just understood something about the person he'd been married to for 38 years, and the understanding was breaking him open. I set up a crowdfunding page. Within 48 hours, it had raised $19,000. Strangers, people who had read the description and shared it and then shared it again. I don't have the words for what that felt like. A woman from my online parenting group organized a fundraiser through her employer's charity matching program, another $8,000. A former coworker, who I had helped through a difficult performance review 3 years ago, who I hadn't spoken to since she left the company, saw the crowdfunding page and called me. She said she had some savings and she wanted to help. She asked me not to make it a big deal. She sent $5,000. I was still short. I had an attorney, not for this specifically. She was the attorney who had handled my separation agreement when Sophie's father left, a quiet, precise woman named Miss Ashford, who worked out of a small office downtown and charged reasonable rates, and had once told me, when I thanked her profusely for her help, that she'd gone into family law because she wanted to be useful to people in the worst moments of their lives. I called Ms. Ashford and explained what had happened. She was quiet while I talked. When I finished, she asked me 3 questions. She asked whether I had documentation of the surgery date and the medical necessity. I did. She asked whether I had records showing the account balance prior to the withdrawal. I did. She asked whether my mother had, at any point in writing, acknowledged that the funds belonged to Sophie's medical care. She did. In a text message from 6 months earlier, when I had updated her on Sophie's condition and the surgery timeline, my mother had replied, "That's what the account is for. We'll make sure Sophie's taken care of." "Miss Bissett," Ashford said, "I'll send a demand letter tomorrow." She also told me something I hadn't known, that depending on the circumstances, withdrawing funds from a joint account when the withdrawing party knew those funds were earmarked for a minor's medical care, and when the withdrawal caused demonstrable harm, could potentially constitute civil conversion or fraud. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was real. It was a real legal theory that real courts had considered. She told me to let her handle the communication from that point forward. I did not call my mother again. Britt's wedding was on a Saturday in late September. I had not been invited. This did not surprise me. I found out the date from my father, who called me the week before, who sounded like a man who had been sleeping badly for 2 months. He told me where the venue was. I don't know why he told me. Maybe he wasn't sure himself. Sophie's surgery had been rescheduled by 4 days, not because of the money, in the end, but because the anesthesiologist had a conflict on the original date that nobody had caught until late August. The new date was a Tuesday, 1 week after the wedding. I arranged for Sophie to stay with a neighbor I trusted the Friday before the wedding. I told my neighbor I had an errand. I drove the 40 minutes to the vineyard where my sister was getting married. I did not go inside. I sat in my car in the parking lot, and I waited. I want to be clear about why I was there, because I've thought about it a lot since. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I wasn't there to confront my sister at the altar, or make her cry in front of her guests, or ruin her photographs. I have never wanted to be that person, and I am not that person. I was there because Miss Ashford had been in contact with my mother's attorney for 6 weeks, and the demand letter had not been met, and the counteroffers had been insultingly low, and Ms. Ashford had filed a civil complaint the previous Monday. I was there because my mother had stopped taking my calls. I was there because I wanted her to see my face one time, just once, before a judge did. I walked to the entrance of the venue. My mother was standing near the door with a glass of white wine, talking to one of my aunts. She was wearing a silver dress and her hair was done, and she looked, I have to admit, beautiful. She always looked beautiful at events. She was a woman who rose to occasions. She saw me. Her face went through several things in fast succession: surprise, calculation, something that might have been guilt if I'm being generous. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. She laughed. I don't think she meant to. I think it was a social reflex, the way some people laugh when they're nervous or caught off guard. But she laughed, and then she said, with her wine glass raised slightly, "Oh, don't look at me like that. Everything worked out." She meant Sophie's surgery. She'd heard about the crowdfunding. She'd heard the gap had been closed. Everything worked out, she said again, more firmly. Like saying it twice made it a philosophy. I nodded once. Then I turned around and walked back to my car. I drove home. I picked up Sophie from my neighbor's house. Sophie showed me a finger painting she'd made, a purple horse with 7 legs, which she explained was because some horses need more legs. We had pasta for dinner. She told me about a fight she'd had with her friend at school that had already been resolved by afternoon. She fell asleep with buttons under her arm and the crescent moon nightlight glowing. My phone buzzed at 10:47 p.m. It was my father. He said there had been some kind of issue at the venue. Toward the end of the reception, 2 men in plain clothes had come in and asked to speak with Conrad privately. My father didn't know all the details. He was telling me what he'd seen, what the murmuring at the tables had been. But it had something to do with a business matter, a financial investigation that had apparently been ongoing for some time. Conrad had left the venue with them. Not in handcuffs, not dramatically, but he had left. Britain had not come out of the bridal suite since. My father said, "Did you know anything about this?" I said, "No." That was true. I hadn't known. Ms. Ashford had filed our civil complaint against my mother, not Conrad. Whatever had come for Conrad that night had nothing to do with me. I found out later, through a news alert I hadn't been looking for, that it was related to a real estate matter. Something that had been building for 2 years in a different county. Conrad's white teeth and his easy charm had apparently not extended to his business practices. I don't feel responsible for that. I don't feel glad either. What I felt in that moment, sitting on my couch with my phone in my hand and my daughter asleep down the hall, was very quiet. The way a room sounds after a long sustained noise has finally stopped. Sophie's surgery was on a Tuesday. We drove up the night before and stayed in the hotel near the hospital, the one with the courtyard where the other families staying there had also learned to nod at each other in a specific way, acknowledging something without naming it. Sophie wore her rabbit print pajamas and watched a movie on the tablet and asked me if the hospital had good jello because she had heard hospital jello was good. I told her I had heard the same thing. She was in surgery for 4 hours and 11 minutes. I know because I counted. Dr. Okafor came out to the waiting room and told me it had gone as well as it possibly could have. The correction had been achieved. Sophie would need recovery time and physical therapy, and she might have some soreness and limitations for the better part of a year, but the structural problem had been addressed. Her spine would grow correctly now. I cried in front of Dr. Okafor, which I had promised myself I wouldn't do. He handed me a box of tissues from the counter and said, "Parents always cry. It means you paid attention." My mother settled 11 months later. Not the full amount. The legal reality of joint accounts is complicated, and Ms. Ashford had been honest with me about that from the beginning. The settlement was $47,000, which my mother paid in a lump sum from her savings. There was no admission of wrongdoing in the settlement documents. There never is. I don't speak to my mother now. That's not a dramatic statement or a punishment I've decided to maintain. It's just the shape of things. Some bridges don't burn all at once. They erode, plank by plank, until one day you look and there's nothing left to cross. My father calls me on Sundays. He always asks about Sophie first. He always sounds a little like a man doing penance, and I don't know what to do with that, so I just tell him about Sophie's physical therapy progress and the 7-legged horse and the one-eyed rabbit, and he listens carefully, the way people listen when they know they don't get many chances. Britt and Conrad are still married. I don't know much else about their lives, and I have decided that's fine. Sophie got her brace off 11 months after the surgery. I took a photo of her the first afternoon without it. She's standing in the backyard in a yellow t-shirt with her arms out to her sides, her face turned up toward the sky like she's checking for rain, or maybe just feeling the air. She looks like a kid. Just a completely ordinary kid on a completely ordinary afternoon. I have that photo on my phone. I look at it sometimes when I need to remember what the point of everything was. The point was never the money. The point was never even the surgery exactly. The point was that little girl in the yellow shirt, arms out, face to the sky. Everything else is just the story of how we got there. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the events, I mean, but the shape underneath them. The reason things unfolded the way they did. My mother didn't steal from me because she was evil. I want to be clear about that because I think the simpler version of this story, the one where she's just a villain, actually lets everyone off the hook too easily, including me. She stole from me because she had spent decades making small decisions that told her certain people's needs mattered more than others. She had practiced that belief so consistently for so long that when the moment came to choose between Sophie's surgery and Britt's wedding venue, it didn't even feel like a moral decision to her. It just felt like a Tuesday. That's not fate. That's not luck. That's the accumulated weight of every choice she had ever made, arriving all at once. I think about that a lot when I think about the kind of person I want to be, the kind of mother Sophie deserves. Every time I choose to do the hard thing, the honest thing, the thing that costs me something in the short term, I'm practicing, I'm building something. And every time I take the easy way out, tell a comfortable lie, let something slide because confronting it is inconvenient. I'm practicing that too. The woman who laughed on my sister's wedding day and said, "Everything worked out," didn't become that person overnight. She became her slowly, one small compromise at a time, over 30 years. What I had going for me was stubbornness. I don't have a more dignified word for it. I was stubborn about Sophie, stubborn about the surgery fund, stubborn about not giving up when the account hit $214, and my brain wanted to just collapse on the kitchen floor and stay there. I made a list. I made calls. I asked for help from people I barely knew, and I let them help me, which is its own kind of hard. asking for help when you've been taught your whole life to handle things quietly, to not make trouble, to not be dramatic. That takes something. It takes deciding that your child's spine matters more than your discomfort. Stubbornness isn't glamorous, but I've come to think it's underrated as a virtue. Resilience sounds like something you're born with or you're not. Stubbornness sounds like something you choose. And I think most of the time that's actually what it is, a choice, made over and over to not stop. Ms. Ashford told me once, near the end of the settlement process, that the cases she remembered were never the dramatic ones. They were the ones where someone just refused to let go of what was right. She said that quietly, the way people say things that are true without needing you to write them down. I think about Sophie in the backyard with her arms out, face turned up to the sky. I think about the photo on my phone. I didn't get there by being lucky. I got there by refusing at every single step to accept that $214 was the end of the story. That's the only thing I know for certain. You don't always get to control what happens to you, but you get to decide every single time whether you stop.